in the wintertime, especially when some of these shorebirds are flocked in groups of 1,000 or more birds in the middle of the shore, the best thing you can do is just walk as far around them as possible, which sometimes means staying in the wet sand, just trace the outside, just instead of walking straight through the middle.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Jessica, Executive Director of Wild Cumberland.
And I'm Devin, a Wild Cumberland volunteer.
We appreciate you being here.
We start every single podcast episode with the same reminder. Our monthly email newsletter is the very best way to stay up to date on issues affecting Cumberland Island and its wilderness. So if you haven't already, go to wildcumberland.org and get yourself signed up.
We like to use these special podcast episodes to dig deeper into topics related to the seashore and, most importantly, its wilderness. Most people know that Cumberland Island is important for more than 300 bird species, including shorebirds, songbirds, and birds of prey. Today, we're honored to talk about Cumberland Island birds with Sarah Manning. Sarah formerly worked for the National Park Service on Cumberland Island and is currently serving as the Coastal Conservation Coordinator, I think that's right, for Birds Georgia. We are so excited to have her join us to talk about Cumberland Island's important for birds.
Absolutely. Welcome aboard, Sarah. It's good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe we could start with you just kind of covering your background and your current role at Birds Georgia. And after that, just kind of tell us a little bit about your work on Cumberland Island.
Yeah, for sure. So I was born and raised in Southeast Florida. So not too different from here, except a lot more developed. But I did go to Florida Atlantic University and major in marine biology and just found birds in the last few years when I was living on Jekyll Island and working at Camp Jekyll 4-H Center and teaching kids about birds. And realized that I do love them. And I did love the Georgia coast. So after 2019, I never left and tried to find a way to stick around. And that led to my position on Cumberland Island. In 2021, I started out there doing sea turtle work and then eventually education and then interpretation with the interpretation division. So started doing bird walks and really getting into them. And now working for Birds Georgia since October 2023. I luckily still get to go out to the island relatively frequently and do some bird surveys on behalf of the park. So that includes shorebirds, but also songbirds and some wading birds as well. And just helps me get out there. And I just really enjoy the island.
So I kind of want to start this out with a little story that I actually had a couple of days ago. I was looking out my front window and saw this beautiful bright red cardinal fly down in my yard. And I got to looking a little bit closer and I noticed his head was completely like bald. And the rest of it was just feathers and everything. And I was like, Anna, I told my wife, just Anna, come down and look at this. It was like, what is that? And sure enough, Googled it. And this is like a very normal thing that birds do, right? It's called molt or molting. Is that correct?
Yeah. So cardinals and blue jays specifically are known to molt all their head feathers at once, which does look interesting when you see them.
Right. Yeah. So I was like stunned looking at this cardinal out my window because I've just never seen it before. And he just looked like a little turkey cardinal mix. It was just weird. I kind of want to start with, do you camp or stay overnight on the island, or are you just going over on like day trips for these bird ventures?
I have camped on the island in the past. My first time camping was January 2020. It was so cold. I was not prepared. I only had Chacos. Those were my only shoes. So my toes were just so cold the whole time. And then my second time camping was July 2020, which
talk
was
about extreme temperature differences.
Yes. And my sister had just gotten back from working in Yellowstone, and she's like, I'm a great camper, so we should go. And it was, really hot and
unforgettable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't consider myself a backcountry camper. So those were both at sea camp. And I love sea camp, but I'm not much of a rugged backpacker.
Sure. Okay. So these trips that you take to the island specifically for, birds, they're just day trips for now?
Yes. So most of the time I'm out there for one night, but I do get to stay in the housing. So luckily I have air conditioning and a bed.
Cool. Cool. What's your favorite spot on the island to observe birds, or do you have one?
I find myself going back to the Marsh Boardwalk time and time again, no matter how many times I've been there. With the tide, it's just always different. There's always something new. Hanging out down there this time of year, it's roseate spoonbills. But depending on when you go, wintertime, could be a belted kingfisher sitting on the railing. But yeah, it's always different. So I love to go down to the Marsh Boardwalk.
Super diverse down there. It's beautiful. We know a lot of people are drawn to Cumberland Island specifically because of its resident and migratory birds. So if you had to guess, what percentage of visitors that go to Cumberland Island, specifically for like the birds, if you just had to throw a guess out there?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know, but I do know that anytime I would throw birds into a conversation, people are excited to hear about it. So I don't think they know that they're there for the birds, but the birds are definitely playing a part in their experience for sure.
Sure. It's like a sleeper interest that kind of creeps up on you after you go to the island. Cause every time I go, I see a bird and I'm like, oh, I don't really know what that is. So I get home, I Google it, I do a little bit of research on it, and I just kind of go from there. Hey listeners, September is National Wilderness Month, and Wild Cumberland is celebrating all month long with the return of our Trivia Night fundraiser. Join us virtually from the comfort of your couch every Wednesday night in September to play Cumberland and nature-focused trivia. With over $500 in prizes, you'll have a chance at both weekly and Grand Series prizes. And don't worry, you don't need to be an expert on Cumberland Island to play. Make sure to stay connected with Wild Cumberland on our social media for more details. The island is actually important to a lot of birds for a lot of reasons. Its protections provide nesting habitat, fresh water, dark, quiet, just so many things, right? But just accessing Cumberland Island doesn't completely eliminate the challenges that these animals face. There's the potential for development. There has been increased motorized use. There may be more visitors, not to mention increasing temperatures and droughts and sea level rise. And so what is your greatest concern or your biggest concern for the birds who exclusively rely on Cumberland Island?
Yeah. So birds that rely on the shoreline specifically, the shoreline is always changing. It's very dynamic. We're lucky to have such vast shoreline right now, 17 and a half miles, right? But it is always changing. A storm could have huge implications for a bird that is going to come back in 6 months and see the shoreline, and it'll be completely different. The foraging might not be there, whatever they're expecting from the year prior. So I think climate change, increased storm impacts, I think that's going to have the biggest effect on Georgia's coast specifically.
Yeah. And I think this year we're supposed to have one of the more severe hurricane seasons. Is that right? So
I think so. Yeah.
We'll have to keep.
But it's been really quiet. Like I'm on edge. Yeah, I think I'm on edge.
So we talk here a lot, obviously, about the wilderness and the ecosystem that services it and provides for so many like flora and fauna on the island. So I'm specifically curious as to what you consider Cumberland Island's most valuable or important asset for birds, just generally speaking. Like, is it Lake Whitney, or is it the freshwater sloughs or the undeveloped beaches? Is it just the quiet, It could be something as simple as that.
Yeah, I would say all of the above. When I was thinking about it earlier, I was thinking just the sheer size of the island. It's the largest in Georgia, and it is mostly undeveloped, right? Preserved by both the Wilderness Act and its isolation in general. So it's hard to access. People aren't necessarily getting up into every nook and cranny. So there are the ability for those birds to be undisturbed for most of the time, if not, a majority of the time. So I do think just the sheer size. And then there are some, novel habitats. So the freshwater, which Cumberland has the largest freshwater lake on any island. So it is unique for a barrier island to have that much freshwater.
I think that goes like really under recognized, right? Like that's such a huge asset.
I didn't know that.
What? Devin?
I really didn't know that. I'm sorry,
This
Jess.
is a big deal. We got to get you up there. Well, when you see
Gotta get
it too,
educated.
it's visually startling, right? I mean, it's like this freshwater lake in the middle of some sand dunes. I mean, it's crazy visually anyway, but I'm glad that you mentioned that because I do think it's just something that we don't give enough credit, so to speak, in terms of value, ecological value and ecosystem services that the seashore offers.
Yeah, I mean, I knew they had freshwater. I just didn't know that it was the largest of the islands. So that's pretty impressive. Sarah, what's your favorite bird?
Oh, yes. My favorite bird changes depending on the season and which bird I'm currently seeing. So in the summertime, it has to be the American oyster catcher,
Awesome.
which are currently occupying the beaches on Cumberland. In the winter, they're still occupying Cumberland, but they're on the backside on the marsh. But those are my favorite currently.
What makes them your favorite?
I just think they're so charismatic. I feel like I know them individually because they do have, most of them are banded. So I can tell I've seen that bird in the same spot every single day for the past 3 years. And they are very loyal. And I feel like I get to know them just because they have a little bit more personality than the average bird.
I agree. I think they have a lot of personality. I just was curious if it was something specific. Well, let me ask this, and I don't want to veer too far off track, but you mentioned like seeing the birds regularly and that you do your survey. I don't know if everybody understands what a survey is. Like we use that term kind of loosely sometimes here. And so what does a bird survey on Cumberland Island entail? How frequently does it happen? And what does it mean?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I like to joke with my family who are not into birds that I'm just going out and asking the birds, their favorite question and their favorite color. But a survey is, done with scientific purpose. I'm intensive on what I'm trying to see. So I'm counting every single bird. I'm identifying them down to species if I can, documenting the weather and the tides and, any disturbance that's present on the beach. So whether that be bicycles or dogs or boats or something like that. Peregrine falcon flies by, scares all the birds away. I'm going to document that as well. So really just getting a good census on what's on the beach. And then over many, many years, you can compare that information.
And are they done just on the beach side of the island at this time?
I do a couple different types of surveys. So I do the shorebird surveys, which are monthly. And that's usually starting in the morning and I'm going up the entire beachfront, not spending too much time down by the jetty and then not spending too much time on the north end, but really the whole ocean facing beach as the tide is dropping usually and just counting every single bird. And that's monthly just for migrants mostly. So we get a good kind of handle on what's using the beach. And the breeding season a little bit more frequently just to see the success of the nesting. So twice a month. And then other people are kind of checking in daily, like the turtle technicians. And then also we have been doing surveys in Stafford Field. So we've been looking at just the birds that are using the field in general. And those are starting at 5:45 in the morning, counting every single bird that's singing for about 3 hours. So that's intensive. And then we did have some wading bird surveys this year as well, which we were looking at the success of the rookery at Serendipity. So that was pretty much the only one that we were monitoring this year, but they were very successful. So that's great.
That's great to hear. Did you say that you travel up and down the shoreline? So like the entire 17, 18 miles?
Yes.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh.
They give her a vehicle though, Deb.
Yeah. She's not walking. Yeah.
She's not
still,
walking
that's a lot to cover. I mean, because you're not going to go very fast with the vehicles, so that's like how long does that usually take you?
Yeah. If I'm starting at 7:15, I'm usually done by noon. So 5 hours.
That's not bad, actually. Yeah. It's not bad. Not as bad as I was thinking. Maybe I'm just overinflating it in my mind because I'm typically a lazy person. So, so your favorite bird, depending on the season, of course, is the American oyster catcher. As far as their nests go, they're like in between Sea Camp and the South Jetty. Is that right?
Yeah. This year we had 7 pairs and
holy moly.
5 of them were south of the Little Grayfield beach crossing. So most of them were on the south end. And then there was 2 up at Long Point. So most of them are on the south end, and most of them are concentrated right where people like to be on the beach. So they are pretty easy to see. They are very conspicuous birds. So black and white with that big orange, almost looks like a carrot.
They're
beak.
so beautiful.
Right.
And yeah, pretty large compared to those other shorebirds. So they do stick out.
Yeah. Do they have any, of course, I've seen signage for the sea turtles and everything like that. Do they have any signage up as far as the birds go, or just bird related signs saying like, watch out for these species or anything like that?
There are some signs that were created last year by
Yay.
myself.
Nice.
Good job, Sarah.
They're in the Sea Camp Ranger Station. They're at the water fountain, and then they're at the campground and the water fountain as well. So, but it's basically just share the shore, help shorebirds by, doing these couple things, which I think we're going to discuss a little bit later. But I did attempt to make some signage, and I do believe some signage is in the works for the beach crossings. Nice.
That's great to hear. Honestly, I think it's important for people to pay attention to that and sort of know the risk of approaching these birds. And wasn't there a project a few years back? I think it was like 2019 or something like that, which has been 5 years.
I may have been before Sarah's time, but I think that's when it was.
Yeah, it was like a pilot program on the island. They installed fencing around the American oystercatcher nests or something like that. Is that correct?
I think it was electric even.
Yes. So, depending on the year, we have installed the fencing. Some years it's electrified. So I do know when there was a graduate student up on Long Point working with Wilson's plovers, she put up some fencing because she was able to monitor it daily. But you do have to just make sure that no other wildlife is getting caught in the fencing. So that was the big issue.
Sure.
Is somebody
Did they find that to be effective and helpful in nest productivity or fledgling productivity?
Yes, it's definitely helpful.
Gotcha. So the purpose of the fences was just to protect them during their nesting season, so nothing got to them, right?
Yes. Since the shorebirds are ground nesting, they're pretty much at risk of anything and everything trying to eat those eggs when they're on the ground. So from possums and raccoons to coyotes, anything will eat an egg, especially if the bird has walked away to go get some food for itself, or if it's scared off its nest by some other disturbance. Something could come along, a ghost crab even. So that fencing doesn't necessarily protect against the small things like ghost crabs, and other birds as well can be predators. So it's not foolproof, but it does help with mammalian predators for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine you can't necessarily foolproof that. So there's still going to be some creatures that get through and everything. So.
Well, and let me ask this, Sarah, how do they determine when that type of intervention, I guess, or preventative measure is necessary?
Yes. So if there's activity on the beach, so if we had this year, we started to see our American oystercatchers nesting in late May. I believe we had our first nest or early May, and didn't have much mammal kind of presence
activity
on the beach. Yeah. So we chose not to put it out. Sometimes it does do more harm than good to kind of put a big, neon orange flashing sign that says bird nest here. Come and get it, So we chose not to put up that fencing this year. And unfortunately, the nest did end up failing. So we didn't find out the cause, but it could have been, any predator that came in.
Sure. That's a fine line to walk, because you definitely don't want to attract people to go over there and look at it and maybe cause disturbance or anything, but you do want to protect it. So that's a big decision either way. Not an easy one either.
Well, I don't think we could talk birds on Cumberland without talking about, is it Gabby? Is it GA? Yeah. School me here, please, Sarah.
Yeah. I've never heard of Gabby.
Gabby. So some birds get really cool names. So my favorite American oystercatcher, her name is AFF, and it's just
love it.
Yeah, it's not a very fun name. There's also an oystercatcher. Her name is Aha. I like that one.
These are great. Nice. Are you kidding?
But Gabby G is for green, B is for blue, and Y is for yellow. So it just spells out Gabby for her name. And
Devin, these are on their bands. So when they band the birds.
I gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. So she is a piping plover. So she's a lot smaller than an oyster catcher is. And they do get bands, but they're not the ones with letters on them. So they have a couple different colored bands on their legs. But Gabby is from the Great Lakes. She nests in Michigan every year, or almost every year. And she's part of the endangered Great Lakes piping plover population, which is about 80 pairs of birds. So
Wow.
federally endangered. But she does spend her entire winter on Cumberland. So she is also the oldest female Great Lakes piping plover. So 15 years old.
Say that 15 times fast.
Yeah. 15 years old. She's tied for oldest piping plover with a male. But she did make it back to her summer breeding grounds this year. And I was hoping for an update on how she did, but I had not received that information yet. But she is a survivor, clearly. Their typical lifespan is, 5-ish years.
And she's 15?
And she's 15.
Wow. That's amazing. And she's all the way up in the Great Lakes. That's because you don't think about it. You see a bird, at least I do. And I'm like, okay, that's just a bird in my area, right? But you don't think of how far they travel or where they're coming from, where they're going. So that's amazing to have, for her to have that story and just be as old as she is. What a success story.
You've come far in your bird journey, Devin.
I have. Since COVID, I've come so far.
Well, Sarah, I've noticed a lot more of a couple species in particular, just anecdotally over the last few years, like the roseate spoonbills, right? And the bald eagles and the wood storks in particular. Do you have any, I guess, data or observations on either those species, just because they're the ones I've noticed, or anything specifically from this season that you'd want to share?
Yeah. So DNR just released its bald eagle report for 2024 recently, I believe last week. And they said it is a banner year for bald eagles as well. So after a low year in 2020, 2021 with avian influenza, the bald eagles are kind of back at it, and they're pretty healthy and they are fledging lots of chicks. So I'm assuming bald eagles on Cumberland did pretty well as well. Said the coastal population got A+.
Wow.
And then, as far as roseate spoonbills, they're a relative newcomer to the coast, right? So since about 2007-ish, when
it's
the first
so weird still to see them and especially now in the volume that you do.
Yeah. So since about 2007, they've been nesting in Georgia, but they definitely seem to be active and healthy, as far as I can tell in my limited capacity. But just about a month ago, they were still feeding young chicks at one of the rookeries. So still a little bit far off for them to be fledging, but now those birds should be out and about in the marshes. And a couple were right there by the Marsh Boardwalk last week. So
your favorite place. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah.
And then for wood storks, I
just love them.
Yeah. I haven't seen much nesting on the island. Actually none on the island, but a lot of roosting happening. So just resting. But the wood stork rookery again in St. Mary's is doing very well. So I think it's 800 or so pairs.
Wow.
That's amazing. And the rookery, can you tell or share with us what the rookery site used to be, just for people to maybe who don't have that historical knowledge?
Yes. So it was the site of the Gilman paper mill, right, which I believe closed in 1999. But one of the containment ponds is great habitat for wood storks. It's deep water. It houses a couple very large alligators with a couple islands in the middle that are naturally vegetated, and the wood storks love it. So they need little islands to protect their chicks, things like raccoons. And those alligators will happily take care of those raccoons. But all these wood storks basically stacked on top of each other in these trees. You can hear it from a mile away.
Far away. Yeah.
Flying out into the marshes and feeding and bringing back that food for their young. So
it's amazing.
Yeah, this might be a dumb question. Is this open to the public?
No.
Yeah,
currently
that's
private.
what I thought. Yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah, I thought that. I just wanted to ask for maybe somebody listening out there,
Fingers crossed. But
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I remember reading too that Birds Georgia was doing these things. I forget what this stands for, but they were called ARUs, right? And they were specifically, I think the context I remember them was the Nightjar Project, right? But can you tell us or explain what ARUs actually are and how they're being used?
Yes. So one project that I've been managing this summer is our autonomous recording unit project. So it's a listening device that's placed in the field somewhere, pre-chosen, and left on its own for a couple weeks at a time. And it's recording sounds at certain intervals. And what I've been looking for are common nighthawks, eastern whippoorwills, and chuck-will's widows.
Which are my favorite birds.
Yeah. And they're all members of the nightjar family. So they're semi-nocturnal, crepuscular birds, way more heard than they ever are seen. They're very well camouflaged, but they are also aerial insectivores. So they're eating bugs on the wing, which is one reason for their decline. So insects are in decline. So aerial insectivores are also in decline. So swallows and swifts and nightjars, all these birds that eat insects, have been declining, and they're very hard to study because of their lifestyle. So we are just hoping to hear them, and successfully we did lots of them.
That's awesome. Yes.
Yeah.
It's not even the density it used to be 10 years ago, but it is by far, I mean, really one of my most treasured natural sounds. Like those sounds they make me happy. And I'm really glad to hear that you guys are still capturing them on Cumberland Island. So how will that data be shared, or will it be shared, I guess, or used for that matter?
Yeah.
Yes. So this project was funded by a grant from the Georgia Ornithological Society, and we're currently collecting all of our units that have been placed out in the field. So I had them at 15 separate places all across the state, hoping to try to determine the habitat preferences for these birds, and then kind of how to manage habitat for them for their benefit. So we are collecting them. I will parse through all the data. So hours and hours of cicadas and frogs, and hopefully some nightjars in there as well.
Like, what a fantastic task, though, frankly.
Yeah. Luckily, there's some software that can help me, because I just end up hearing cicadas like white noise. But we'll go through that. We're going to share it with the property owners first, and then try to maybe publish some sort of document that shows kind of the preferences of the birds and how to benefit them on your own land. So hopefully that will be in the works, maybe late winter this year.
That's really exciting. I cannot wait. Thank you guys for doing that work. That is super exciting.
Absolutely. We can't wait to see what comes out of that. These ARUs, right? Is that what they're abbreviated? Okay. Yeah. These ARUs, is this kind of your primary data source for Cumberland Island and its birds?
So just for the nightjars, I only had one unit out on Cumberland. I had it on Northcutt Road, on the north side of Northcutt Road, where all the really young pines are, just to see how fire affects these birds in an area that burned about 4 years ago. And has not been burned since. So we were trying to see how fire and different timberland managements are affecting them, kind of our control site. Otherwise, we also did a nighttime driving survey. I just drove the main road and listened for them. And again, I got about 75 birds on that one, over 10 miles.
Yeah. So you mentioned like the fire and kind of seeing how they react to that and everything. Are there any other types of like, kind of sidestepping from that, any visitor impacts that you see most frequently or most commonly when you're on the island for the birds?
For the birds that I'm seeing, it's typically on the beach, and it would probably be bicyclists just bicycling straight through a flock of birds and having the birds fly up. And I'm sure most people don't really think about what that means for a bird, right? But we were talking about earlier, these birds are potentially migrating thousands and thousands of miles just to land on our coast, stop for a few days and refuel before they move on. So I think that's one of the larger impacts, is just while birds are resting, people just disturbing them.
Sure. Yeah. What are some ways, if somebody does come across some resting birds, what's the proper protocol? What should they do?
Yeah. So in the wintertime, especially when some of these shorebirds are flocked in groups of 1,000 or more birds in the middle of the shore, the best thing you can do is just walk as far around them as possible, which sometimes means staying in the wet sand, just trace the outside, just instead of walking straight through the middle of the flock.
Sure.
But at low tide, that's very easy. There's plenty of beach to walk on, you can share. At high tide, it does get a little bit more difficult, but that's one thing you can do is just walk around instead of through.
Mm-hmm.
And the other would be, it's not a huge issue on Cumberland because of its remoteness, but dogs on leashes when you're visiting the beach. So any beach can be habitat for birds, especially some of these more developed areas like Jekyll and St. Simon's, Tybee. You definitely want to have your dog on the leash on the beach and make sure your dog is actually allowed there.
Sure.
Some places do have rules.
And this is like almost guaranteed to happen when you're on the island. But if you ever come across a bird in distress or like a deceased bird on Cumberland Island, what happens, when a visitor or even park staff for that matter, what happens when they come across that sort of thing? Like here in urban areas, right, where we live, we typically call a licensed wildlife rehabber and they can help out, or sometimes they want to do a necropsy.
Yeah.
So maybe it depends on whether or not it's a protected species or something. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the best thing to do, first of all, is to not touch it because it could be, injured. It could bite you, could have some sort of illness that you don't want to spread around to other birds or to yourself or non-native birds as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So avian influenza, especially, very contagious, and rehabbers will not accept those birds anyways for the safety of their own patients. But
Sure.
The best thing to do would be to report it right away. And if there is anything the rangers can do, they will. So they'll probably send out the biologist and he'll take a look at it. But most of the time, if a bird's washing up on the beach, it's not a good sign anyway, unfortunately.
Sure. That's a tough situation for sure. Is there anything that you would like to see differently on the seashore as far as like the treatment of these birds, or maybe it's just as simple as the signs that you've been putting up, maybe more knowledge, more education surrounding these birds on the island? Is there anything that you'd like to see maybe done different on the island or anything like that?
I would love more bird walks that would be, and I would love, to participate in more bird walks, but you can't protect what you don't know about. So most people are just kind of going about their day and not as aware of what's going on. So I think just a little bit more active education, maybe less passive.
We support. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like there's a good handle currently on kind of like the bird management or the population management on the seashore, or the risks that they face and everything like that?
Yes. So very active. I mean, myself doing the surveys and kind of keeping a thumb on the pulse of the populations in that way, but very active management as far as, see something on the beach that's not quite right, it's going to be taken care of. So like predators, or if we are having too much human influence, there are signs that go up. So we do have those fences and those signs. So if that's becoming an issue, that gets dealt with pretty quickly.
Yeah. And how long or how often are you out there?
Yeah, I come out on the beach. I'm out once a month.
Once a month.
But it increases. Yeah, it increases more during breeding season.
Okay. And when is that breeding season again?
Well, it depends on the bird, Dev, but
I know that. But
just
giving you grief.
Breeding season for all
I'm
birds. You're just out
grief.
there all the time,
I wish. About April usually.
Okay. Yeah. So pretty typical depending on the bird, but.
And in the winter, starting in March, we start twice a month for piping plovers because they're migrating through. They're not stopping in the month of March on their way north. So we're trying to capture as many unique piping plovers as possible. So I'm out there a little bit more frequently, March, April, May.
Wild Cumberland is staffed entirely by volunteers. We say that a lot, often in passing, but we want to make sure our listeners understand what that really means. Our team members donate their time, effort, and talents to help ensure that Cumberland Island and its wilderness remain protected. Every volunteer can find a place with us. We invite you to sign up to staff Wild Cumberland events, contribute to the organization's social media, assist in grant writing, and much more. Join us at wildcumberland.org and help make a difference for the next generation. We can't get through this episode without dropping one of my favorite apps in the world, the Merlin Bird app. I absolutely love this app.
Not a sponsor, however.
Not a sponsor.
Yes, go ahead.
I absolutely love this app. Anytime even somebody mentions birds around me, I'm always like, do you have the Merlin Bird app? I just love it because it's kind of trained my brain to pay attention to calls and the different sounds that they make. And, I'm picking up on different species and able to kind of recall from memory by using the app, what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing when I'm walking and everything. So do you use the app as well?
Yes. I definitely use Merlin. I use it less than I used to, for sure. Because like you said, it's a great way to be more aware. And I'm more of a visual learner. So I would love it if the shorebirds just got within, 10 feet from my face and I could get a good look at them.
Yeah.
That's not always the case, but I like how Merlin shows you the picture. It pops up and it highlights it while it's singing. So you can make that visual connection to the audio. So that's what helped me really put a face to the bird.
Yeah.
I got to get my bird packs right.
Yeah, you got to download your Southeastern Bird Pack. That's what I did. And that seems to have covered a lot of the ones that I'm hearing. So depending on your region, for whoever's listening out there, you can download different packs, as they call them. And it just downloads the information for the different bird species in different parts of the country, or I think the world, wherever you are. So it's pretty important to get those downloaded wherever you are so you can put a face to what
Be a
you're
bird
hearing.
nerd like Devin.
A bird nerd.
And me.
We're all bird nerds, right?
We are.
What other just kind of like basic tools are you using? Obviously, are you doing binoculars?
They have fancy stuff.
They got fancy binoculars, right?
I have moved away from the binoculars a little bit, and I have a spotting scope. That magnifies very, very, very small things, makes them humongous in the spotting scope. But I also do have a camera so that if the bird flies away, I at least got a picture to document it. So I do find myself using a camera in place of binoculars most of the time.
Very nice. Yeah, I got to upgrade my pair of binoculars. I got them back in 2020 and they were like maybe $40.
Beginner set.
They're beginner set. And I like to think I'm probably approaching the intermediate stage, right? Yeah, I am. So before we go, and this answer doesn't have to be bird related or anything like that, but what's the coolest or even the weirdest wildlife encounter you've had on Cumberland Island?
Okay, perfect. I do have a non-bird one. Sorry, birds, but it was February 2021, and I was out by Dungeness Ruins. It was really foggy. It was a really beautiful morning, and a bobcat just came out of the forest, strolled across the front lawn, and hopped through the pergola, and then continued its way down the road. And that was the only time I've ever seen a bobcat kind of out in the open for more than a split second. And it just looked at us and then kept walking. And that was really magical.
Yeah. I've never seen a bobcat. Jess, have you seen a bobcat?
Yes.
Yeah, I bet you have. Jess has got years of experience on me, so I'm not surprised.
No, but there on the south end, there was a bobcat who was very, he wasn't shy and he was out very frequently. Most of my kids, I think, encountered him at one point or another. But the fog, I bet, made it look especially magical. And that's incredible. What a great experience.
Even luckier that I had my camera with me, so I did get a picture.
What? Nice. Good job.
Yes. Right spot, right time, right equipment. Usually it's you're lacking one, right? You're like, oh, I can't get a good picture of it. No one's going to believe me. I have two. One was my wife and I were walking. There was nobody else on the trails. And this was kind of like probably around sunset, but we started hearing a lot of rustling in the palmettos and everything. And there were hogs running around. And we had never seen hogs at least that close, but they were like crossing the trails and it was like a mad frenzy. That was pretty cool. I actually think I got some of that on video, Jess. My second one took place the same trip. We saw a pileated woodpecker, and those guys are huge. I had no idea how big those woodpeckers were. I know, Jess, you've probably seen a lot of those, haven't you?
That's Zachary's favorite. My son, he can spot those, and and Zachary's pretty good at birding by sound. And so he is very good at recognizing a call. And so that's his favorite thing to do when we're there, is point out about every 30 feet. Did you hear that pileated woodpecker? Did you hear that pileated woodpecker? It's great. They bring us great joy. That's really cool.
I was surprised at the size of them.
As your birding skills continue to evolve and the more time you spend on the seashore, your stories will just get better. So think about it. I mean, you set the bar pretty high already.
Oh, thanks. I don't want to take the credit on that, but
hey, Cumberland has some magic, man.
It does. It's a magical spot for sure. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We know us reporters appreciate your efforts to protect these birds. And, of course, we sure appreciate what you shared with us today and just all of the work that you do and your organization does. So, maybe in the future, maybe I can hit you up for some Cumberland Island bird facts for our upcoming trivia night.
Good idea.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so we're having a trivia night in September. It's every Wednesday in September. There's going to be a lot of facts about Cumberland Island and just different nature-related aspects. So I think I should definitely reach out to you for some.
At least have her check your facts. How about that?
Yeah, at least, you can be my fact checker and inspiration for that, for sure. So I appreciate your time, Sarah. I hope that you'll come back and join us again. This is a great conversation.
This was really fun.
Yeah. To learn more about Birds Georgia or learn more about the work that they do across our state, visit birdsgeorgia.org.
We know how valuable your time is, so thanks for choosing to spend some of it with us. Stay wild. Wild Cumberland is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and all donations are tax deductible. Learn more and take action at wildcumberland.org.
The Wild Cumberland Podcast is produced by Vertical River, and this episode was edited by Greg Cuson.